The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, coffee going cold on the counter. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone before I even answered it. It was a woman named Mrs. Pamela Chen. She introduced herself as the school counselor at Riverside Elementary. She said she'd been working with my son, Caleb. And then she said something that stopped my heart. "Miss Harper, Caleb has been telling his classmates that his mother left him because she didn't want him, that she chose her career over him, that she never calls, never visits, and doesn't even know what grade he's in." I couldn't breathe. "He's been acting out," she continued, her voice calm but careful, "crying during lunch, getting into fights, refusing to do homework. He told his teacher last week that there was no point trying because nobody in his family cared anyway." I sat down right there on the kitchen floor. Because here's what you need to understand. I called Caleb every single day. Every single day. I sent letters, I mailed birthday gifts, I drove 4 hours every other weekend to see him. I had been doing that for 2 years straight, ever since the custody arrangement had changed. And yet my 9-year-old son believed I had abandoned him. Someone had been lying to him, and I already knew exactly who. Let me explain where things stood at that point in my life. 2 years before that phone call, I had gone through a divorce. It wasn't ugly at first. My ex-husband, Daniel, and I had agreed to share custody. Caleb would spend the school year with Daniel in Maplewood, where Caleb's school was, his friends were, his whole routine. I had moved to another city for a job after I lost my position locally. It wasn't my choice to leave. The company I worked for had downsized, and the only offer I got was 3 hours away. I took it because I had to. I had bills, I had debt from the marriage, I had a child I needed to support financially. Daniel's mother, Gloria, had moved in with Daniel shortly after the divorce. That part I hadn't expected. Gloria and I had never been close. She was polite to my face when Daniel and I were married, but there was always something underneath it, a stiffness, a way she would look at me like I was a guest in a house that belonged to her. When Caleb was born, she made it very clear that she considered herself the central grandmother. She was there for every birthday, every school play, every little league game, which was fine, I didn't mind that. What I minded was the way she would sometimes whisper things to Caleb when she thought I wasn't listening. Little things. "Your mama works too much," or "We were just fine before she changed everything." Things a child absorbs without understanding. After the divorce, I still called every day. I spoke to Caleb every night before bed. At first, the calls were normal. He would tell me about school, about his friend Marcus, about the turtle he wanted to name Spike. He sounded like himself. But then, slowly, something shifted. He started getting quiet on the phone. Short answers. "Fine. Okay. I don't know." Sometimes he would hand the phone back to Daniel after only a few minutes. Sometimes the call just end. And when I called back, no one would answer. I told myself it was an adjustment period. Kids go through phases. He was 8 years old and his whole world had changed. But then the school counselor called, and I realized this wasn't a phase at all. Someone had been actively, deliberately poisoning my son against me. To understand how deep this wound went, you have to understand who Caleb was to me before any of this happened. I was 28 when I found out I was pregnant. Daniel and I had been together for 3 years. We weren't planning a baby, but the moment I saw those 2 lines on that test, something inside me shifted permanently, like a door opened that I hadn't known was there. I remember driving to the baby store 2 days later, not to buy anything, just to walk through it. I stood in the middle of that little blanket aisle and I cried. Happy tears, the embarrassing kind that you can't stop even when a teenage employee asks if you need help. I read every book. I downloaded every app. I took the birthing class and the infant CPR class, and I decorated the nursery 3 different times because I kept changing my mind about the colors. I settled on a soft yellow, warm and bright, like morning light. Caleb came into the world screaming at 6:42 in the morning on a cold February day, and from the second the nurse placed him in my arms, I was gone, completely gone. There was no version of me that existed separately from being his mother. We lived in a small house on the east side of Maplewood, the kind of neighborhood where kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. We had a big oak tree in the backyard, and when Caleb was 3, Daniel built him a wooden platform up in the branches. Not quite a tree house, but close enough that Caleb called it one. That tree house was our place. Every weekend morning, Caleb would climb up there with his juice box and his stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunks, and he would call down to me like he was announcing news from a great height. "Mama, I can see the Johnson's dog," or "Mama, there's a red bird up here." I would bring my coffee out to the yard and sit in the old lawn chair below him, and we would just exist together in the quiet of the morning. Birds in the branches, sunlight coming through the leaves, the smell of cut grass, and whatever the neighbors were cooking for breakfast drifting over the fence. Those mornings were the best thing I have ever had. When Caleb started school, I walked him every single day, even when it was raining, even when I had an early meeting. We had a ritual. Before he went through the school doors, he would turn around, hold up his right hand with all 5 fingers spread wide, and I would do the same from the sidewalk, our version of a high five across a distance. His idea. He came up with it when he was 5 and decided regular goodbyes were boring. We did that every day for 4 years. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that what happened later didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened against the backdrop of all of this, against every morning in the backyard, against every hand raised at the school gate, against a love that was, for me, the defining fact of my entire life. So when I found out someone had told my child that his mother didn't want him, it didn't just hurt me, it hollowed me out. Daniel was not a bad father. He was steady, patient, and Caleb adored him, but Daniel had one serious flaw, and that flaw was his mother. Gloria was the kind of woman who needed to be needed. She had raised Daniel alone after her husband left when Daniel was 7. She had sacrificed and struggled and built her identity entirely around being the one who held everything together. And for a long time, that strength was real and admirable. But it had a shadow side. She couldn't let go. She couldn't share. And when Daniel married me, she had smiled at the wedding and given a beautiful toast. But inside, I think she was already calculating how to take back what she felt was hers. The first sign came about 3 months after I moved. I called on a Thursday evening like I always did. Daniel answered, said Caleb was in the bath, told me to call back in 20 minutes. I did. This time, no answer. I called again. Nothing. I texted Daniel. He responded an hour later. Sorry, he fell asleep. Call tomorrow. I didn't think much of it. Kids fall asleep early. But then it happened again the following week, and the week after that. When I finally got Caleb on the phone, I asked him if everything was okay. He said yes. Then he said something strange. Grandma says you're very busy. I'm not too busy to talk to you, I said. I'm never too busy for you. He went quiet for a second. Then, okay. Just okay, like he didn't quite believe me but didn't want to argue. I pushed it aside. The second sign came at Thanksgiving. Daniel had agreed I could come to Maplewood and spend the holiday with Caleb. We had talked about it, planned it. Caleb had been excited when we spoke the week before. But when I arrived at Daniel's house, Gloria answered the door. She looked at me with that practiced smile of hers. "Oh," she said, "we thought you weren't coming." "We talked about this weeks ago," I said. "Caleb was expecting me." Daniel mentioned it might not work out, she said smoothly. Caleb was a little confused. But come in, of course. I stepped inside. The house smelled like turkey and cinnamon. Caleb came running from the back room, and when he saw me, he stopped. Just stopped, like he was surprised. "Mama?" he said. "Hey, baby." I opened my arms and he came to me, but it was slower than usual, less running, more walking, like something had knocked the certainty out of him. "I thought you weren't coming," he said against my shoulder. "I told you I was coming," I said. "Grandma said maybe." I looked up and Gloria was watching us from the kitchen doorway. Her expression was pleasant, unreadable. That was the first time I felt it clearly, that cold, specific feeling of someone working against you in a room that looks perfectly normal. The third sign came 2 months later, in January. I had sent Caleb a package for his birthday, new sneakers he had asked for, a book about space because he'd been obsessed with planets, and a letter I had written by hand, 3 pages long, telling him everything I loved about him. I had tracked the package. It was delivered. When I called on his birthday, he thanked me for the sneakers. "Did you get the book?" I asked. "What book?" "The one about planets. It was in the same box as the shoes." A pause. "No, just the shoes." "And the letter?" I asked carefully. "Did you see the letter?" "There was no letter, Mama." My stomach dropped. I asked Daniel about it later. He said he wasn't sure what happened. Said the package had come and he'd given Caleb what was inside. Said maybe the book fell out during shipping. But I knew exactly what had happened. And I think Daniel knew too. He just wasn't willing to confront his mother about it. That was his real failure. Not cruelty, not malice, just a lifetime of looking away when Gloria did things that were easier to ignore. By spring, the phone calls had become almost unbearable. Not because Caleb was rude, he wasn't, but the warmth was going out of them like a light dimming slowly. He still said he loved me when I said goodbye, but it felt practiced, like a line from a script he'd been handed. I started writing everything down, every call, every missed call, every strange comment. I didn't know why at the time. Some instinct told me to document things, so I did. In March, I drove to Maplewood for the weekend, my scheduled visit. I had told Daniel I was coming, confirmed 3 days before. When I arrived, Daniel met me at the door looking uncomfortable. "Caleb's at a birthday party," he said. "What birthday party?" I asked. "We had plans." "It was last minute. His friend Marcus." "Daniel," I looked at him. "This is my scheduled weekend. We confirmed it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom thought it would be good for him to go. She said you could see him Sunday instead." "I drove 3 hours." "I know. I'm sorry." He genuinely looked sorry, but sorry wasn't the same as standing up. I sat in that driveway for a long minute. Then I drove to a nearby coffee shop and waited. I spent that entire Friday at a table by the window, drinking bad coffee, watching the rain. When Caleb finally came home and I got to see him that evening, Gloria was there. She sat in the living room the entire time. Every time Caleb and I started to really talk, she would call him for something. "Caleb, come help Grandma find her glasses." "Caleb, aren't you hungry?" "Caleb, come see this on TV." He kept jumping up, kept getting pulled away. At one point, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and Gloria followed me in. She stood by the counter and her voice dropped low. "You know, he's doing really well," she said. "He's settled now. He has a routine. All this back and forth isn't easy for children." "I'm his son," I said. "I'm not giving up my visits." She smiled, that same smooth smile. "Of course not. I just think stability matters most, don't you?" It was perfectly worded, nothing you could argue with directly, but the meaning underneath it was clear. You are the disruption. We are the stability. Know your place. I drove home Sunday night and cried the entire 3-hour drive. In April, I found out through a mutual friend that Gloria had been telling people in Maplewood that I had chosen my career over my child, that I was hardly ever in the picture, that Daniel was basically raising Caleb alone. Maplewood is a small town. People talk, and they believe what they hear from someone who has lived there for 30 years. I called Daniel that night. "Your mother is telling people I abandoned Caleb." He went quiet. "Is that true? Is she saying that?" "I'll talk to her." "I need more than that, Daniel." I said I'll talk to her. He did talk to her. I know because things went quiet for a few weeks. No obvious interference. Caleb seemed a little more like himself on the phone, but the damage was already spreading, like roots underground, working in the dark. Because what I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't know for another several months, was that it wasn't just the neighbors hearing those things. Caleb was hearing them too. The school counselor's call changed everything. After Mrs. Chen told me what Caleb had been saying to his classmates, I asked if I could come in and speak with her in person. She said yes, come as soon as you can. I took a day off work and drove to Maplewood the next morning. Mrs. Chen was a small, precise woman with reading glasses on a chain and a warm way of sitting forward in her chair when she spoke to you, like she was genuinely interested in every word. Her office was small, with drawings from students pinned to a cookboard and a little shelf of picture books by the window. She told me what she had observed over several months. Caleb's grades had slipped, he had stopped participating in class, his teacher had noted that he often sat alone at recess, which was unusual for a boy who had always been social. Several times he had cried at school without being able to explain why. In her sessions with him, he had gradually opened up, and what he said had alarmed her enough to call me. He told me his mother moved away and never came back, she said carefully. He said he sees her sometimes, but she doesn't really want to be there, that she calls, but it's just because she has to. I felt the words like physical blows. "Mrs. Chen, I call him every day. I have records of every call. I drive here every other weekend. I have toll records, gas receipts, everything. I have never missed a scheduled visit that I wasn't deliberately blocked from." She nodded slowly. She had already suspected something was wrong. "There's something else," she said. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a drawing Caleb had done in a feelings exercise. His teacher had asked the class to draw their family. Caleb had drawn Daniel, Gloria, and himself, in a house, with a yard and a son. I wasn't in the drawing, not even in the background, not even as a small figure, just completely absent. I sat there looking at that drawing for a long time. Then Mrs. Chen said, "I think we need to talk about next steps, because what Caleb is describing sounds like parental alienation, and there may be legal remedies available to you." I hadn't heard that phrase before, parental alienation, but it settled into my chest like something I had been trying to name for 2 years. She gave me the name of a family law attorney in the area, someone she had worked with before on similar cases. His name was Robert Adkins, and she said he was good. I called him from the parking lot of the school. Robert Adkins was not what I expected. I expected a slick type, the kind of lawyer who fills your head with promises and sends big bills. Robert was none of that. He was a quiet man in his early 60s, with a methodical way of talking and a habit of writing notes in tiny, precise handwriting while you spoke. He wore the same kind of plain, dark suits every time I saw him, and he never made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. When I laid everything out for him, he listened without interruption for almost 40 minutes. Then he said, "Do you have the records you mentioned? The call logs? The receipts?" "I have everything," I said. "I've been keeping records for almost a year." He looked at me with something close to approval. Good, that was smart. We talked for another hour. He explained that what Gloria appeared to be doing had a name, a documented pattern, and a legal response, but he was also honest with me. "Courts move slowly," he said, "and modifying a custody arrangement isn't simple. We need to demonstrate a pattern of interference, not just a few incidents. How long have you been documenting?" 8 months, I said. And before that? I have some records, call logs from my phone, some texts with Daniel. He nodded. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to keep documenting everything. Every call, every visit, every blocked visit. I want you to write down anything Caleb says to you about how he feels about the situation. And I need you to be patient. Patient. I hated that word at that moment. My son was sitting in a school counselor's office, crying at recess, drawing pictures where I didn't exist. Patience felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, but I knew he was right. Robert also told me something I hadn't considered. He said, Mrs. Chen is a mandatory reporter. If she documents that a child is being emotionally harmed through false information given by a caregiver, she is required to report that. She may have already initiated something with Child Protective Services. She had. I found out 2 days later. A family services caseworker had already been assigned to look into the situation. That changed the timeline. The custody review hearing was scheduled for 40 days out, which meant I had 40 days to build the strongest possible case. Those 40 days were the hardest of my life. I still called Caleb every night, but now I listened differently, not just for what he said, but for the spaces between what he said, the pauses, the phrasing that didn't sound like a 9-year-old. One night he said, "Grandma says if the judge decides, I get to choose where I live." My blood went cold. "That's not exactly how it works, baby," I said carefully. He said, "When you're old enough, you get to pick." I kept my voice steady. "What do you want, Caleb? Not what anyone told you. What do you actually want?" A long silence. Then quietly, "I want you to not be so far away." I closed my eyes. "I know, sweetheart. I'm working on that. I promise." I hung up and sat in the dark for a while. The hearing was 38 days.
Daniel's birthday was 20 days before the hearing. He turned 40, and his sister organized a dinner at a restaurant in Maplewood, a family gathering. I was not invited, obviously, but I was in town for my weekend visit with Caleb, and Daniel had agreed I could bring Caleb back to the restaurant for the last part of the evening so he could celebrate with his dad. I wasn't planning any kind of confrontation, I want to be clear about that. But when I walked into that restaurant with Caleb's hand in mine, and I saw Gloria sitting at the center of that long table like a queen at her court, holding court with Daniel's aunts and cousins, telling some story that was making everyone laugh, something shifted in me. She saw me the moment I walked in. Her smile didn't drop, it adjusted, became the polished version. "Oh," she said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Look who decided to show up." Caleb stiffened beside me. I felt it through his hand. "We're here for Daniel's birthday," I said, calm, even. "Of course." She gestured to 2 empty seats at the far end of the table, plenty of room. We sat. Daniel came over and hugged Caleb, gave me an awkward nod. The dinner went on. I kept conversation with Daniel's sister, Maria, who had always been kind to me. Caleb ate his cake and talked to his cousin. And then Gloria started talking. She wasn't talking to me directly. She was talking to Daniel's Aunt Patricia, who was sitting close enough that I could hear every word. It's been so hard on Daniel, doing it all himself. The school runs, the homework, the doctor's appointments. She handles the fun parts when she visits, of course, but the real parenting, a small, regretful shake of her head, that falls on us. Patricia murmured something sympathetic. "Caleb asks for her sometimes," Gloria continued. "Loud enough, always just loud enough. And I just tell him, some people have different priorities. It's not his fault she chose a different life." Something broke loose inside me. I put down my fork. "Gloria," I said. The table went a little quiet. "I hear you, and I need you to hear me." My voice was steady. I had not planned this, but I was not going to sit there. "I call my son every day. I drive here every other weekend. I have never once told him that he wasn't my first priority. What you just said isn't true, and more importantly,
I looked at Caleb, who was watching me with wide eyes. "My son is at this table." Gloria's smile was thin and careful. "I wasn't speaking to you." "No, you were speaking near me, near my child, about her mother. That's actually worse." Daniel said, "Maybe we should—" "I've been documenting everything," I said. I hadn't meant to say that, but I did. Every visit, every call, every time I was told to come back later, every package that arrived missing things that were in it. Gloria's expression changed, just slightly, a flicker of something. "I don't know what you're implying," she said. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you." I kept my voice quiet. "I love my son, and I am not going away." The table was silent. Caleb's hand found mine under the table. Small fingers, warm and tight. I held on. The custody review hearing was held on a Thursday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old paper and floor cleaner. Daniel had a lawyer. Gloria was present as a witness. Robert had prepared me thoroughly. We had everything organized. Call logs printed and dated, toll records, gas receipts, testimony from Mrs. Chen, the family services report, and Caleb's drawings documented by the school. But the most important thing Robert had done was something I hadn't expected. Robert had subpoenaed the school's communication records, because what I hadn't known, what none of us had known until Robert requested those records, was that Gloria had been in contact with Caleb's school. She had called the school office 4 times in the past year. Twice she had identified herself as the primary guardian and asked that all important communications be directed to her first, citing that the mother is frequently unavailable. The school had partially complied, not out of malice, but because they had no reason to question a grandmother who appeared engaged and present. That was why some of the notes about Caleb's behavioral changes went to Gloria first. That's why I hadn't been notified sooner. Robert put Mrs. Chen on the stand first. She was precise and clear. She described what Caleb had told her over months of counseling sessions. She described the drawing. She described the documented shift in his emotional and academic performance. She used the words emotional harm and systematic misinformation, and they landed in that courtroom like stones dropping into still water. Then Robert presented my records. Every call, every visit, every blocked weekend documented with my texts to Daniel asking what happened. Every package tracked and delivered. Daniel's lawyer tried to frame it as a difficult co-parenting situation, normal friction after a divorce, nothing out of the ordinary. Then Robert showed the judge Gloria's school communications, and then he showed the judge something else, something I hadn't even fully understood the significance of until Robert explained it to me the week before. Gloria had applied to be listed as Caleb's emergency contact, the primary one, above both Daniel and me, at the start of the school year. The school form had a box for primary household guardian. She checked it and signed her name, and on the same form in the section for parent contact information, my phone number had been listed incorrectly, 1 digit off, a transposition. Whether that was an honest mistake or not, the result was clear. For months, when the school had tried to reach the mother, they'd been reaching a number that didn't exist. The judge looked at that form for a long time. Gloria's lawyer tried to say it was a clerical error, an honest mistake. The judge asked Gloria directly if she had filled out the form. Gloria said she had helped fill it out, that it had been a joint effort with Daniel. Daniel, to his credit, looked at the floor and said he hadn't seen that form before today. The silence that followed was significant.
The judge did not rule immediately. Family court judges rarely do. But she ordered a full guardian ad litem investigation, meaning an independent advocate was assigned to represent only Caleb's interests. She also ordered that all parental communications go directly to both Daniel and me simultaneously going forward, with no third-party filtering. And she strongly recommended that Caleb begin working with a child therapist outside of the school setting. She also said, on the record, that the evidence presented suggested a pattern of interference that warranted serious review of the existing custody arrangement. Gloria said nothing when we left the courtroom. She walked ahead of Daniel to the parking lot, shoulders tight, and got into the car without looking at anyone. Daniel stopped me on the courthouse steps. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than one bad day. "I didn't know about the school form," he said. "I know. I should have—" He stopped, started again. I kept telling myself she was just trying to help, that she loved Caleb and her heart was in the right place. Her heart probably was. That's almost what makes it worse. He nodded slowly. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time and had finally set it down and wasn't sure how to stand without the weight. "I'm going to talk to a therapist," he said, "for me, about her." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Over the following weeks, the guardian ad litem met with Caleb 4 times. She also met with Daniel, Gloria, me, Mrs. Chen, and Caleb's teacher. Her report, when it came, was detailed and measured. She noted that Caleb showed signs of emotional confusion regarding his mother, and that this confusion appeared to have external origins, rather than Caleb's own experience of their relationship. She noted that his actual interactions with his mother, as described by Caleb himself, were positive and consistent. She recommended an increase in my parenting time. 2 months after the hearing, the judge approved a modification. Caleb would now spend summers and alternating holidays with me, and the school year arrangement would be reviewed again in 1 year. The order also specified that neither parent or any household member was to make statements to the child about the other parent's absence or availability. Gloria was not legally removed from the picture. She was his grandmother and Daniel's mother, and that wasn't going to change. But she was no longer able to quietly run things from the background without accountability. I heard through Maria that Gloria was furious, that she felt the whole proceeding was an attack on her and that no one appreciated what she had sacrificed. I understood that, in her own way, she believed she was right. That made her dangerous for a long time. But now there were eyes on the situation. Now there was documentation and a court order and an annual review. She wasn't going to risk all of that, and she knew it. The first summer Caleb spent with me in my apartment, I was terrified, not of being with him, of the gap, the quiet distance that had grown between us over 2 years, carefully maintained by someone else's hands. I didn't know how much of my son I would find under all of it. The answer was all of him. He arrived with 2 bags and Mr. Trunks, the stuffed elephant, who was now missing 1 eye and had a repaired ear that someone had stitched back on with blue thread. Caleb held him the way kids hold old, worn things, not carefully, just naturally, like a part of himself. The first morning, I made pancakes. We ate at my small kitchen table by the window, and the sunlight came through at an angle that made everything look warm and golden, and Caleb told me about a dream he had about a spaceship made entirely of waffles. I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and uncomplicated. He looked at me when I laughed, and he smiled, and it was his real smile, the one with the small gap between his front teeth, the one that had been there since he lost his first tooth at 6 and the new one came in slightly crooked. I had missed that smile so much that seeing it hit me like a physical thing. We spent those summer months slowly building back what had been quietly torn down. We didn't talk directly about Gloria or about what had happened, not at first. I didn't push. I let Caleb lead. One evening, about 3 weeks into summer, he came and sat next to me on the couch while I was reading. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat there. Then he said, "Mama, did you ever not want to call me?" I set my book down. "No," I said, "never, not for 1 second." "Because Grandma said, sometimes parents—" "Caleb," I turned to face him, "I called you every single day, every day, even when the calls were short,
Even when you seemed busy, I called because you are the most important thing in my life. That has never changed, not for 1 minute." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like something clicking into place. "Okay," he said, and then he leaned against my shoulder and picked up his book, and we read together in the quiet for the rest of the evening. That was the moment I knew we were going to be okay. Not perfect. Healing isn't perfect. There would be more therapy, more conversations, more careful moments, but the foundation was still there, underneath everything that had been piled on top of it. All those mornings in the backyard, all those hands raised at the school gate, all that love, unbroken, still there. If you've made it this far, I think you know this wasn't just a story about a custody battle. It was a story about how someone can take something true, a mother's love, and quietly, methodically make a child doubt it, without screaming, without obvious cruelty, just words dropped like seeds into a little boy's mind over months and years, and how one school counselor's phone call, one day, one woman who paid attention, changed everything. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted was quietly working against you? Not openly, not obviously, but in that slow and careful way that makes you start to doubt your own reality, where you knew something was wrong but couldn't quite prove it? Because I think more people know that feeling than we talk about. It happens in families, in workplaces, in relationships, and the hardest part is always the same. The people doing it are often people who genuinely believe they're right. That's what I want you to take from this. Document things, trust your instincts, find your Mrs. Chen, the person who is paying attention, who calls you when others won't, and do not give up on the people you love, even when someone is working very hard to make them give up on you. Caleb is doing well. He sees his therapist every 2 weeks. He drew me a picture last month, his whole family, everybody in it, including me. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever been through something like this, or if someone you know has. You'd be surprised how many people are carrying something like this quietly. And if you're new here, I share stories like this every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You are not alone.